Victoria's diamond earrings swung as she surveyed Leonardom's hushed staff, every hurried movement a testament to her reputation. "This table," she declared, icy gaze settling on a lone diner, "is unacceptable." He looked up, a single father unaware he held her redemption in calloused hands. Unacceptable, he thought. The air crackled. Be busy with other tasks. In the corner sat a man in a simple shirt, a single father waiting patiently at his reserved table. When she approached his area, her voice heavy with disdain, "Nobody here is worthy of sitting at the same table as me." He looked up, his gaze calm and steady. "I don't think that's true." The entire restaurant fell silent. "Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching this video from. I'd really love to know that." Now let's start our story together. David Miller was 38 years old, a single father who worked maintenance jobs to support his 9-year-old daughter Emma, while navigating the careful balance between earning enough for their modest apartment and being present for homework help, school events, and the countless small moments that define their close relationship. His days were structured around Emma's needs and his work schedule, leaving little time for the kind of social activities that most adults took for granted. The dinner meeting had been arranged by Marcus, an old friend who worked in corporate consulting, and who had insisted that David needed to expand his professional network beyond the construction and maintenance crews where he normally found employment. This could open doors for better opportunities, Marcus had explained over coffee, pressing David to consider meeting potential business contacts who might value his practical skills and work ethic. David had reluctantly agreed to the dinner meeting at Leonardom, understanding that Marcus was trying to help, but feeling uncomfortable about the expensive restaurant and formal business atmosphere that seemed designed for people with very different backgrounds and financial circumstances than his own. He'd arrived 15 minutes early as always, wearing his best shirt and hoping that his obvious discomfort in elegant settings wouldn't undermine whatever professional opportunity Marcus thought this meeting might create. The restaurant staff had been buzzing with nervous energy since he'd been seated, their whispered conversations suggesting that someone particularly difficult was expected to join him for dinner. David caught fragments of their discussion about a demanding customer who was notorious for treating service workers poorly and creating uncomfortable situations that made everyone dread her arrival. When Victoria Hale entered the restaurant, the change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Servers who had been moving efficiently between tables suddenly found urgent tasks in storage areas. While the hostess approached Victoria's table with obvious reluctance and carefully neutral facial expressions that suggested years of experience managing difficult customers, Victoria was clearly accustomed to the effect her presence had on restaurant staff, moving through the dining room with the kind of imperial confidence that expected absolute difference from anyone whose job involved providing service to paying customers. Her expensive clothing and perfectly controlled appearance marked her as someone who was used to having her preferences accommodated without question or delay. "Where is my dinner companion?" Victoria asked the hostess, her tone carrying irritation that someone had failed to meet her exacting standards for punctuality and availability when she required their attention. David had been observing the interaction from his corner table, noting how the restaurant staff seemed to shrink under Victoria's scrutiny and how her obvious wealth and authority were being used to intimidate people whose livelihoods depended on maintaining professional courtesy, even when customers treated them poorly. When Victoria approached his table and made her dismissive comment about the worthiness of her potential dinner companions, David's response came from values his wife had instilled and his own understanding that treating people with basic human respect was more important than accommodating someone's sense of superiority, regardless of their financial status or social position. "I don't think that's true," David said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of managing construction crews and dealing with his own challenges as a single parent. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, including the people who work here." The response seemed to surprise Victoria, who was clearly accustomed to either obsequious agreement from people hoping to benefit from her wealth or careful avoidance from those who couldn't afford to risk offending someone with her influence and resources. David's willingness to challenge her behavior in a public setting created exactly the kind of uncomfortable situation that most people worked hard to avoid when dealing with wealthy and powerful individuals whose displeasure could have professional or financial consequences. Victoria sat down across from David with the kind of controlled precision that suggested someone who was accustomed to having every interaction proceed according to her preferences and expectations. But her obvious surprise at his directness indicated that his response had disrupted whatever script she normally followed during business dinners with people seeking her approval or investment. "Do you know who you're sitting with?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the kind of cold authority that had probably intimidated countless business associates and service workers into submission over the years she had built her corporate empire. David's response demonstrated his understanding that Victoria's wealth and influence were undeniable facts, but also his conviction that financial success didn't justify treating other people poorly simply because they were in subordinate positions. "I know who you are," he replied evenly, "but I also know that nobody deserves to be treated badly just because they're here to serve you." The comment created a ripple of reaction throughout the restaurant staff who were within hearing distance, their obvious surprise at witnessing someone challenge Victoria's behavior, directly suggesting that such confrontations were extremely rare in her social and professional circles. Rather than the explosive anger that the staff seemed to expect, Victoria's response was thoughtful silence, as she studied David's face with the kind of intense scrutiny that suggested she was trying to understand motivations that didn't fit her usual experience of human nature in business relationships. Their conversation continued with Victoria, testing David's resolve through increasingly pointed comments about social hierarchies, business success, and the realistic expectations that people should have about their place in economic systems that rewarded wealth and punished financial limitations. David's responses remained calm and principled, drawing on his experience as a single parent who had learned to prioritize his daughter's well-being over his own comfort, and his understanding that character was measured by how people treated others when they had the power to choose kindness or cruelty. "Money doesn't make someone a better person," David said when Victoria suggested that her financial achievements gave her the right to expect special treatment from everyone around her. "It just gives them more opportunities to show who they really are." The observation seemed to affect Victoria more deeply than David had expected, her carefully maintained composure showing cracks that suggested his words had touched on something vulnerable beneath her powerful exterior. Their dinner progressed with Victoria gradually revealing information about her background and the experiences that had shaped her approach to business and personal relationships, including betrayals by family members and business partners that had taught her to trust no one and to use power as protection against future disappointments. David listened with genuine attention, rather than the strategic calculation that Victoria was probably accustomed to receiving from people who wanted something from her. His responses demonstrating empathy for her experiences, while also maintaining his position that past hurts didn't justify treating innocent people poorly. "I understand why you might feel like you need to protect yourself," David said as Victoria described the business betrayals that had cost her millions of dollars and personal relationships that had ended when she discovered people were only interested in her money. "But punishing everyone around you for other people's mistakes isn't protection, it's just isolation." The comment landed with visible impact, Victoria's eyes showing emotions that she normally kept hidden behind professional composure and financial authority that had become both her shield and her prison over the years she had built her business empire. "Do you believe that one calm response can shake an entire room?" Comment, yes. As their dinner conversation continued, David began to understand that Victoria's harsh treatment of restaurant staff and business associates wasn't rooted in natural cruelty, but in defensive mechanisms developed through years of being used, manipulated, and betrayed by people who had presented themselves as friends, family members, or romantic partners, while secretly planning to exploit her wealth and influence for their own benefit. The revelation emerged gradually as Victoria found herself responding to David's genuine interest in her experiences rather than the strategic flattery or intimidated silence that characterized most of her social interactions. She described a childhood where family members had treated her as a future financial resource rather than a person worthy of love and attention, followed by early business relationships where mentors and partners had systematically stolen her ideas and resources, while presenting themselves as trustworthy guides. "Every person who ever claimed to care about me was lying," Victoria said, her voice carrying pain that years of financial success had failed to heal. family, friends, romantic partners. They all eventually revealed that they were only interested in what they could take from me. David's response demonstrated his understanding that Victoria's defensive behavior was a rational response to genuine experiences of betrayal, while also challenging her assumption that everyone in her current life was necessarily motivated by the same greed and deception that had characterized her past relationships. I'm not saying your experiences weren't real or that you shouldn't be careful about people's motivations, David replied thoughtfully, choosing his words carefully to acknowledge her pain while also offering a different perspective. But when you assume everyone is going to hurt you, you end up hurting innocent people who never had any intention of taking advantage of you. The conversation shifted to David's own experiences with loss and betrayal, including his wife's death from cancer that had consumed their savings and left him struggling to provide emotional stability for Emma while managing the practical challenges of single parenting on a limited income. His willingness to share personal vulnerability without seeking sympathy or financial assistance seemed to surprise Victoria, who was accustomed to people using their problems as leverage for gaining her support. After Sarah died, I had to figure out how to keep going for Emma's sake, David continued, his voice carrying the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving genuine hardship without becoming bitter or defensive. I could have decided that life was cruel and that nobody could be trusted, but that would have meant Emma grew up with a father who was angry and suspicious instead of someone who still believed in kindness and hope. Victoria listened to David's story with obvious attention, her questions revealing genuine curiosity about how someone could maintain optimism and trust after experiencing profound loss and financial hardship that might have justified cynicism and defensive isolation. The most powerful moment of their conversation came when David explained his philosophy about human nature and the choices people made about how to respond to both good and bad experiences in their lives. People who have money can choose to use it to protect themselves from everyone, or they can use it to make the world better for people who haven't had the same advantages. David said, his tone carrying conviction rather than judgment. People who have been hurt can choose to hurt others, or they can choose to prevent other people from experiencing the same pain they went through. The observation seemed to resonate with something Victoria had been struggling to understand about herself and her relationships with the world around her, including her treatment of restaurant staff and business associates who had never actually wronged her, but who had become targets for frustrations created by people from her past. "You're saying I've been punishing innocent people for crimes committed by others?" Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying recognition rather than defensiveness as she processed the implications of David's perspective. David's response was gentle rather than accusatory, demonstrating his understanding that Victoria's behavior had emerged from genuine pain rather than innate cruelty. "I think you've been protecting yourself in ways that worked when you were surrounded by people who wanted to hurt you," he said carefully. "But now those same protective measures are keeping you isolated from people who might actually care about you as a person." The conversation concluded with Victoria sitting in thoughtful silence, processing perspectives about trust, vulnerability, and human connection that challenged everything she had learned to believe about protecting herself from a world she had experienced as fundamentally hostile and exploitative. Sometimes real strength isn't found in power, but in honesty. Subscribe to Solo Dad Diaries to hear more. In the weeks following their dinner, Victoria began reaching out to David with phone calls and text messages that started as professional courtesy, but gradually evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences of single parenting challenges that created common ground despite their dramatically different financial circumstances. Their conversations revealed that Victoria's wealth and corporate success had never provided the emotional satisfaction or sense of purpose that David found through his close relationship with Emma and his commitment to being present for her daily needs and long-term development as a confident, compassionate person. Victoria's first visit to David and Emma's modest apartment was arranged tentatively with obvious uncertainty about whether she would be welcome in their simple living situation or whether her presence would create awkwardness that might damage the friendship they had been developing through careful conversations about parenting work and finding meaning through relationships rather than professional achievements. Emma's reaction to Victoria was immediate and uncomplicated by adult concerns about wealth, social status, or the complex emotional issues that had shaped Victoria's approach to relationships throughout her adult life. "Are you the lady Dad had dinner with?" Emma asked with 9-year-old directness. Her curiosity focused on Victoria's role in their family life rather than her professional achievements or financial resources. Victoria's response to Emma's attention was visibly emotional, suggesting that being valued by a child for her willingness to participate in simple family activities was a novel experience that touched on needs she had long suppressed through focus on business success and financial accumulation that provided security but not genuine human connection. Over the following months, Victoria became a regular presence in David and Emma's daily routines, helping with homework assignments that challenged David's limited artistic abilities, joining them for weekend activities like park visits and grocery shopping that represented normal family life she had never experienced during her own childhood or adult relationships. The transformation in Victoria's behavior was noticed by the restaurant staff at Billionaire, where she had begun treating servers with courtesy and respect that surprised everyone who had previously dreaded her visits. Her interactions with business associates also changed as she began prioritizing long-term relationships and employee well-being over short-term profit maximization that had characterized her previous corporate leadership style. "Miss Vic makes the best pancakes ever," Emma announced during one of their weekend breakfasts. Her enthusiasm for Victoria's cooking efforts reflecting the child's complete acceptance of someone who had become an integral part of their family structure through genuine affection rather than obligation or financial benefit. Victoria's laughter in response to Emma's compliment was genuine and unguarded, representing perhaps the first time in years that she had experienced joy that wasn't connected to business achievements or financial success, but simply to being valued by people who cared about her daily presence in their lives. David observed Victoria's gradual relaxation into domestic activities and family routines with appreciation for how completely she had embraced opportunities to contribute to their household in practical ways that demonstrated care rather than merely providing financial support that would have been easier but less meaningful for all of them. The changes in Victoria's personality were most evident during their evening conversations after Emma had been settled with homework and bedtime routines, when she spoke openly about her growing understanding that wealth and power had provided protection, but had also prevented her from developing the kind of authentic relationships that actually made life satisfying and meaningful. "I spent so many years building walls to protect myself," Victoria confided during one of their discussions about parenting and relationships, "that I forgot there might be people worth letting inside those walls." Several months later, Victoria had become a regular part of David and Emma's daily life, often visiting their small apartment to share simple meals and participate in evening routines that had gradually replaced her previous schedule of business dinners and corporate events that had filled her time without providing genuine satisfaction or emotional fulfillment. One rainy evening when the power went out in their neighborhood, the three of them gathered around their small kitchen table, with candles providing the only light, telling stories and sharing conversation that felt more meaningful than any expensive entertainment Victoria had previously considered worthwhile. "If Miss Vic stayed here all the time, that would be so much fun," Emma said with characteristic 9-year-old enthusiasm. Her suggestion delivered without understanding of the adult complexities involved in such arrangements, but with complete confidence that Victoria's permanent presence would enhance their family life. Victoria looked at David with eyes that had softened considerably since their first confrontational dinner meeting, her expression carrying hope and vulnerability that she had learned to risk again through months of experiencing genuine acceptance and affection from people who valued her character rather than her financial resources. "Maybe it's time I stopped living in that glass tower," Victoria said quietly, her words acknowledging both her previous isolation and her readiness to commit to relationships that required emotional investment rather than strategic calculation or protective distance. David reached across the small table and took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the candlelight. No formal proposals were needed. Their love had grown through shared grocery runs, homework help, and quiet evenings that had already proven more valuable than any business deal Victoria had ever negotiated. Emma looked between them and grinned. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" Victoria's laugh mixed with tears she no longer felt ashamed to show. For the first time in decades, she had found something worth more than all her corporate victories combined. The next morning brought ordinary magic. David and Victoria walked Emma to school together, their joined hands swinging gently while Emma chattered about her upcoming art project. The suburban sidewalk stretched ahead of them like a promise, each step carrying them further from Victoria's isolated penthouse and deeper into a life built on simple moments that money could never buy. The transformation from intimidating billionaire to devoted family member had occurred through David's patient demonstration that not everyone in the world was motivated by greed or deception. While Victoria had learned that vulnerability and trust could lead to genuine happiness rather than inevitable betrayal when shared with people of authentic character and goodwill. Their unconventional family structure represented proof that meaningful relationships could develop across economic and social boundaries when people prioritize kindness, honesty, and mutual support over financial advantage or social status that might impress others but didn't create the emotional satisfaction that came from being truly known and accepted by people who cared about daily happiness rather than professional achievements. If you believe that true happiness comes from life's simplest moments, subscribe to Solo Dad Diaries to hear